I teach courses on inequality and criminal justice to both undergraduate and graduate students at U of T. And one of the things that I begin those classes with is really trying to drive home the point that not only does our criminal justice system respond to various forms of inequality, but it also plays a key role in reproducing those forms of inequality. And so I think the place that I'll actually start here is that when we hear about the defunding the police movement. I prefer the term detasking the police because I want the police to do less and I want the funds that they get to kind of mirror that. But, we can think about the huge amounts of money, period, that are being spent on our criminal justice system, which really is, the last line in a series of social institutions. And so the money that we spend on the criminal justice system would be much better spent in child welfare, in education, in employment and training than it is on the back end of a system. So I think that's, one of the easiest answers is simply to think about where we're spending our money. But when we think about, the huge amount of stigma that's attached to having a criminal record and to being criminalized, we can then start to understand about how individuals, families, and whole communities' life chances are affected. There's a huge body of research to show that an individual who has a criminal record, for example, and especially a person who has spent time behind bars, has a much harder time gaining meaningful employment, right? They're much more likely to be dependent on the state for social assistance. And so if you as an individual have a criminal record and you have a harder time getting a job, well, then of course the likelihood of experiencing poverty is greater. Now we think about that in the context of a family, and men are overrepresented amongst people who have criminal records and, for example, who are incarcerated. And they are, still more likely to be the breadwinner for a family, especially if it's a young family with children. And so by taking that individual who, is one of the key earners out of the household, then that family is more likely to exist in poverty. We see patterns of criminalization and incarceration in Canada that again mirror those in the United States, where we have, postal codes that are highly criminalized and where incarceration is, almost normal for members of those communities. And so in those situations where we have, large portions of working age people who are saddled with a criminal record, rendering them less employable, or who are incarcerated, rendering them even less employable, then, the informal networks that help people get jobs are broken down, right? The ability of people to spend money at local businesses is diminished. Children who have an incarcerated parent are much more likely to have behavioral problems themselves, much less likely to succeed in school. And so, the negative effect of criminalization and the negative effect, importantly, of incarceration on individuals spreads not only from that individual to the family unit, but also to the community unit. So again, the social networks are broken down, the economic resources within those communities is broken down. And importantly as well, when crime and when criminalization becomes normal, then people are, the bonds that tie communities together and that support pro-social activities are also broken down as well. So we can create these kinds of cycles of crime and criminalization. But at the end of the day, someone who is criminalized is much less likely to be able to find meaningful employment. That affects their families, that affects their communities. And ultimately, they become increasingly dependent on the state. Again, if they're more likely to be criminalized, that's money that's being spent on the criminal justice system instead of in other areas that would have, what we would call upstream benefits. For me, the more we can remove the police and other elements of the justice system from the lives of people, the better, right? So the less we have the police intruding into the lives of people where they're not needed, the less likely we have to have these feelings of hostility and disdain towards the police that, can fuel law-breaking behavior, the less likely people are to be unnecessarily criminalized. For so long in the West, it was, politically dangerous to be what was seen as soft on crime. People had to be tough on crime. We, responded to a host of social ills with the criminal justice system as opposed to what would have been more sensible responses in healthcare and mental health care and with the provision of other social services. And I think we need to have a very serious rethink about how we frame the provision of social services and the provision of services generally in our society, and move away from, a criminal justice response. And one of the key ways to interrupt this is through the provision of opportunities for individuals. So I think especially, given the situation that I've just talked about with respect to, breaking down informal professional networks and other networks within communities. So I really think that, the provision of opportunities and also awareness about, different lines of employment, the different types of jobs, the different skills one needs for different types of jobs is extremely important to me. So there are, literally hundreds of organizations, thousands of organizations across this country who are doing, the very things that I've just proposed, providing job skills and training opportunities to young people and young marginalized people. One of the saddest things for me is that, these organizations are beholden to grant funding too often, right? Grant funding that operates on a 1, a 3, a 5-year cycle. And so they're always struggling, always fighting to secure that next grant, right? Which takes a lot of attention away actually from program delivery. If knowing funding is sustained and that evaluations can be done to improve program development and delivery, well then, again, the provision of services is likely to benefit. The most important thing for me in having these conversations, and especially in interrupting like cycles of poverty in the context of conversations around the criminal justice system, is the ultimate payoff down the road, right? Like we hear different figures, anywhere from 3 to 1, from 7 to 1. Every dollar spent up front saves $3, saves $5, saves $7 down the road. But it also, saves lives, saves families, and saves communities. And so many people are hesitant to provide funding for a variety of services, thinking that, people should be responsible for their own well-being. Well, at the end of the day, if we let people fall through the cracks, right, if we let social, political, and economic marginalization continue to play out in the way that it does, we end up paying more money to criminalize people than we would simply to help, whether it be from, prenatal services through early childhood care and education, through the educational systems into employment.